Hello, I'm Caden. This is Robert, and then that's Erin. And this is our final presentation for our Codebreaker project for iTech. So right here, Robert wrote a main program, and this is so you can choose between my version, his version.
So it'll ask you, so first off, it includes the C++ files as a dependency, and then it'll clear the screen, and it'll define all the files. If they don't exist, it'll create the files. So then what we do is we have this loop, and once you've input a correct response, it'll end the loop, and it either goes to Robert program, Caden program, clear high scores, or exit. So this is Caden's program.
Yep, so now me and Robert wrote our own versions of the project, and right here I made sure to comment areas. So right here, this is just the main directories and libraries I used for mine. So this is for a sleep function, so it kind of like waits in between. The file writer, the C time is to help randomize a code, which I'll get to, and then string and iOS stream. Some constants for seconds, and this is a clear function, similar to what Robert said for his main. It's so you can clear the screen when you need to. So right here, it's a high score function for once you complete the Codebreaker game, and it'll give you a high score. Right here, it's the guess and check function. I'll get to that in a sec. These are just kind of the main functions, and I'll go in order how they work. Then you got the main game function and main. Gotta make sure I fix that. So right here, the bool is so it'll loop and it'll see out my version right here. The while loop is just to see if you're running my version of the program, and essentially it'll keep prompting you with an input on if you want to play, view scoring information, view the high score, or quit. If you press Y, it'll run the game, which we'll get to in a second. Then if you press S, this is how you can score in the game. This is commented out for test purposes, and then right here, this will print out the high scores if you want to view that. And of course, if you quit, plain will be set to false. It'll clear out, and then it'll go back to Robert's main, so you can choose between mine and his. And so if you want to play the game, it'll go up to the game function, which this is kind of where the main stuff happens. So right here, it'll be a blank ints for the total guesses you have and your code length. Here, it'll just check if you actually give a correct prompt, because in mine, you're able to choose, and same with Robert's, if you want your code to be from 1 number to 25. And same with the guesses, you can either have 1 guess or 25 guesses, which influence your score. So here, the generate code function runs, and this is where C time comes in, because then it'll help randomize a code that you have to guess. And here it sets that up with your guesses. So here it's another while loop, so while your guesses are greater than 0, it'll go through what type of, it'll give you the input for your code you want to guess. And here I made it so you can quit out if you just want to quit while you're in the middle of the game. And here it checks everything to make sure that it's the correct length. And if it is, it'll run the guess code function, which up here it'll basically just make sure that you don't have any numbers repeating and you have a number in the correct spot, which if you go up to it, yep. So here it'll loop through your guess and the correct code that is hidden, and essentially it'll just make sure that it's all correct. And if it is, it'll return you win, or type of similar to this, like how it's in the code but in a different spot, or if it's no longer in the code if you've guessed all the numbers for that area. So essentially this all repeats until you either guess it or you do not guess it. But if you get the code correct, it'll let you input your name for the high score leaderboard. And this is just the simple how to get your score. It's basically your guesses times 10,000, 100,000, yeah, 10,000. And then you get your score, and then it'll add your high score to the leaderboard and tell you your score. And here, this is just if you don't guess it correctly, immediately it'll add and minus your guesses and your current guess. And eventually, that's how mine works, and you can see in the files that we'll provide how it works for yourself and try it out. And now Robert will go over his version.
All right, so my file, it includes term color, which will allow me to add colors into the terminal. So I have 2 arrays. I have an array for the numbers that are on an array from correct, which will go for 0. It's not right. 1, it's somewhere else in the code. I mean, in the code. And then 2 is it's in the correct place. So I had to use a long int because my number, because it uses width essentially, and if you go too high, integer overflows. So I had to use a really large number. So it'll print Codebreaker in different colors, and then it'll print the array out. So string to integer I had to use because a few places we're taking and comparing the integer as a string and then converting it back to an integer. So here's the main function. We initiate a random number, clear the screen. So in this splash screen, it'll kind of flash from blue to green. You'll see that later. And so it'll ask you, you can only input a number between 1 and 18 for the width. And once you've entered a correct one, it'll ask you for the number of guesses you get. And then it sets the entire array to 0 because there's no correct numbers yet. So then after that, when we start getting into it, we print the array out, we clear the cin, and we'll call the random number until we have random numbers for each of the digits. And then for the first number, it has to be greater than 0, otherwise you're not able to input it. So it'll go through that. So send for each of the guesses, it'll check for a correct input. So it'll, if it's good and the length is the length of the random number, it'll stop, print out OK, clear the cin. Otherwise it'll print out that you have not inputted a valid input. So then if it's the same, it'll check if you substring the specific letter, and it'll compare it to the random number, and if it's the same, it'll add it into the array. But if it's not in the code anywhere, it'll set it to 2. If it's in the correct spot, if it's not in the if it's in the code somewhere else, it'll be 1. If it's in the correct spot, it'll be 2. So then we set the correct array to whatever the current status is of that number. So if all of the numbers are 2, so we'll check if the length of so we check the correct, and if 2 times the amount of number 2's in the correct code enter is the same as the length, then it'll print you in, it'll give you the number, it'll print out the score, and it'll ask your name. If you lose, it'll say you lose, and once you've won, it'll call upon Erin's function to add it to the leaderboard.
Hello, I worked on the leaderboard. The first bit is just all my integers, or my variables, for like the previous scorings and for the new placement. Here we're just opening the file, the 2 different files for the 2 different programs. This is irrelevant now. Alright, and so this is just reading from the 2 different files. And this is finding the name and the score. And this is when we actually get into sorting it. So basically, like, if the number is greater than the previous placement, you take that place and the rest of them get bumped down. So if you got the lowest score, you would place first, and the one that was previously in first would go down to second, and so on. And that's just what all this does. And this is the output telling you what place you got. And just all that for all the placements. And here we're writing back to the file. This opens the file and clears it. And this writes all the new placements to the file. There we go.
So now me and Robert are going to show off how, in the shell, how it looks when you run it.
Alright, so we move this over to the main screen. We're going to full screen it. So to start the program, I'm going to type in ./codebreaker.sh. Oh, yes. Thank you. So it'll ask you for R for Robert's, C for Caden's, S to view the high score for Robert, or H to see view the high score for Caden's. So if you want to clear it, you type in tilde, and if you want to exit, you type in X. So my function, it'll display alternating colors, can enter a number of digits and a number of guesses. So it'll print the array, so you can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, and so now I know that the code is 22157. I'll put that in. It gave me a score of 75, which means I took a lot of guesses. So I'll put my name as Robert, and it'll tell me that I placed first. So now if I go to view the high scores, it'll tell me that I'm first place. So now Caden's version.
Yep, so for my version, similar to Robert's here, you can also, so here if you press S, you can view my scoring info, and then it'll loop back to this, and here's my little high score, and as you can see it's a leaderboard from placeholder. And then Q is for quit, and this will just loop back. I won't do that one, so if we do Y, it'll do the code length. So for simplicity, I'll do 5, then I'll do 25, just in case. Now, guess the code, so it'll print out guess 1, then you can type quit if you want to exit out earlier, so I'll just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So here it'll print out kind of your little hints here. So here it'll say that the number 1 is in the code but in a different spot. How 2, 3, and 4 aren't, and same thing with 5. So I'll just kind of keep looping through this until you get the guess right using deduction. So yeah, so here there's 2 number 1s in the code because it says that it's in the right spot, but it's also somewhere else along with it. So 9, 0. Yeah, and here, so now that we have the 2 1s in the correct spots, and now that they say that they're no longer in the code because you have all those possible spots where it could be. So here you go, now we win, so now I can enter my name. And then I'll print out what my score, and if you view the high score leaderboard, there it is. Then I'll quit.
So now,
sorry, one last thing. We go back here, and then, like Robert said, if you want to view mine, there you go.
yep. So then another thing you can do is if you're feeling like you're not very good at winning at this computer and you want to reset the high scores, you just type in tilde, enter, it'll clear the high scores. Now if you view mine, there's nothing, and if you view Caden's, there's nothing.
And that is our presentation, and we'll make sure to include the files in the video link and along with our presentation. Thank you.